along tonight. My name is Melissa Halpin and I'm a councillor with People Before Profit. And we've called this meeting this evening because, as you all know, the housing crisis is just going from bad to worse and worse and worse and worse. And we've been campaigning on this issue for many years now, and finally it is beginning to come to the top of the agenda. You know, it is actually beginning to strike home with the vast majority of people that this situation cannot continue the way it is, because there's absolutely no improvement despite endless announcements of things going to change. There is absolutely no improvement, and things deteriorate for everybody, not just for the people who are in homeless services, but for their extended families and for all of us here in this room, and for those who have been evicted. We got a message today from one of our supporters who can't be here tonight because she has spent all day working with a friend who is being evicted from her home by a vulture fund, and after living in her home for a number of years has been pushed out by these nameless, faceless vulture funds. So on every level, the crisis is just getting worse and worse. So what we're trying to do tonight is bring together everybody here so that we can really work together to try and get policy change, because ultimately without policy change we're not going to see any resolution. And there are many events coming up. The one that we're really backing at the moment and looking forward to is on Wednesday week, the Raise the Roof Homes for All protest at the Dáil at lunchtime on Wednesday week, which we've loads and loads of leaflets here for, and hopefully we'll be able to come out of tonight with a plan for how we're going to try and make sure that as many people out here in Dún Laoghaire know about that protest, and those who are able to support it do. So without further ado, just one announcement to make is that there's a woman here who's going to be filming the a woman here, I'm sorry, and a man there who's much more obvious than the woman over here. But they're both going to be filming. They're going to film the speeches in general. But if there's anybody who's speaking from the floor who doesn't want to be part of that, just make sure you say it when you're speaking, and they will not film you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. We're very, very lucky to have Vincent Browne, who needs very little introduction, author, journalist, who's entertained us for many years on the screens, and many of us miss him terribly for the late night show. So we have Vincent Browne, and then we have Conor Ruddy, who's been very key in the Take Back the City occupations around town, which have really catapulted the movement back onto the streets, which has been fantastic for all of us. Then we have Chloe Power, who's from the IDT Students' Union, and then to finish off the speeches will be Richard Boyd Barrett, who is the local TD for People Before Profit. So Vincent will kick off. Thanks very much.
I promised there'll be no entertainment. I told them that if I was to speak first, there'd be nobody here for the second speaker, because I've planned a really boring speech. I'm serious, and at the end is a poem, a long poem, goes on and on. So anybody who wants to leave now, it's probably... in the late 60s, early 70s, was a Dublin Housing Action Committee. It was started by the predecessors of the Workers' Party, Sinn Féin, and the Workers' Party at the time. And a fellow involved with the Dublin Housing Action Committee was a fellow called Dennis Dennehy. And he and his family, wife and children occupied a big Georgian building in Mountjoy Square. And Underwood, the house was owned by a guy called Underwood, who lived out here somewhere. And he owned, I think, 7 or 8 similarly large Georgian buildings around Dublin, which he was renting out. And Dennis Dennehy, and he went to the High Court to seek an order to have Dennis Dennehy removed and the family. And Dennis Dennehy represented himself in the court, and the lawyer in part of Underwood said this was a breach of entitlement to private property, and that is the fellow would have to be put out. And Dennis Dennehy, who was not represented by any lawyer, made the point to the judge that there's a bit in the Constitution which talks about the family and gives precedence to the family, and that should this now trump the right to private property because the family is given a special sacred place in the Constitution, and which was a really good argument, I thought, but the judge said, no, off you go, out, and that was it. And I think that the issues to do with private property go to the heart of a lot of the problems we have with housing. When you hear so many houses vacant around the country, and people say, oh, we can't do anything, we require compulsory purchase orders, and you can't be sure you're going to get them, or whatever, because of the protections that the law and the Constitution gives to private property. There is a problem there. And I just thought, I just have a few ideas, and this is why I warned you this is going to be terribly boring. But there are a few articles of the Constitution which I think are relevant. And the first is Article 43, which goes on about private property. And the state acknowledges that man, in virtue of his rational being, has the natural right, antecedent to positive law, to the private ownership of goods. Anybody who understands that, there's something wrong with them. The state accordingly guarantees to pass no law attempting to abolish the right to private property or the general right to transfer, bequeath and inherit property. The state recognises, however, that the exercise of rights mentioned in the foregoing provisions of this article ought in civil society be regulated by the principles of social justice. The state accordingly may, as occasion requires, delimit the exercise of the said rights with a view to reconciling their exercise with the exigencies of the common good. In other words, the state is saying there is a very fundamental right to private property because of what they thought was natural law, which was a Catholic idea, which is very much ingrained in the Constitution itself. And that maybe there could be exceptions in some instances where there was an overwhelming demand for the common good. And the courts over the years have attempted to reconcile these competing factors of this article and have come down generally in favour of the private property one, and that the exigencies, the common good thing, is almost always regulated or always subjugated or trumped by the private property right. Now, of course, there are occasions where the state is able to compulsory purchase land, for instance, to build roads, and there doesn't seem to be much problem about getting compulsory purchase orders to build roads. But as everyone knows, the right to have cars and fast cars and have open roads takes precedence over everything else. So anyway, there is this problem in the Constitution about private property, and it is qualified, but only grudgingly qualified. But there are a few other things in the Constitution which haven't been raised, and I think that as part of campaign somebody might make an issue of this. Article 40 of the Constitution says, all citizens shall as human persons be held equal before the law. The state guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable, by its laws to defend and vindicate the personal rights of the citizen. Now, I think the personal rights of the citizen surely includes the right to shelter. And surely that ought to be taken into consideration by the courts and maybe trump the personal rights to private property. But there's something else in the Constitution. Article 41, the state recognises the family as the natural, primary and fundamental unit group of society, and as a moral institution possessing inalienable and imprescriptible rights antecedent to all positive law. The state therefore guarantees to protect the family in this Constitution and authority as the necessary basis for social order and as indispensable to the welfare of the nation as a whole. Now, if the family has this primacy in the Constitution, and if families are homeless, surely they're entitled, as a family, surely constitutionally they're entitled to a home, and surely that trumps the private property right. I have not heard that, apart from Dennis Dennehy argument, I've not come across any case that's being argued